There is a moment in Season 4 of Regular Show, Episode 9, the Christmas Special, where snow is falling on the park and the characters are bundled in winter coats, celebrating the holiday season with a villain who wants to destroy Christmas. 2 episodes later, in Firework Run, it is the beginning of July. The sun is out. The characters are in short sleeves. They are buying fireworks for the 4th of July. Between those 2 episodes, 6 months of time passed without a single reference to the transition. No spring, no thaw, no explanation. The show simply jumped from December to July, as though the intervening months did not exist, and no one in the park seemed to notice. That is not a production error. That is the show telling you, quietly and without apology, that its timeline does not work. And once you start looking for the places where it breaks, you find them everywhere. There are 10 of them that rise above the rest. 10 contradictions so large that the show cannot explain them away with cartoon logic or magical thinking. 10 moments where the rules the show established for itself collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. And each one tells you something not just about what the show got wrong, but about what it was trying to do when it made the mistake. These are not the kinds of plot holes that come from carelessness. They are the kinds that come from ambition. Real quick, subscribing keeps videos like this coming, and it costs nothing. Now let us continue. Regular Show was a show that wanted to be a silly cartoon and a serious character study at the same time. It wanted the freedom to send its characters to the moon without spacesuits, and the gravity to make you cry when one of those characters dies in the finale. It wanted to tell episodic stories that reset at the end of each 11 minutes, and serialized stories that build across 8 seasons. These desires are contradictory, and the contradictions produced plot holes. But the plot holes produced something too. They produced a show that felt alive in a way that perfectly consistent shows often do not. The cracks in the logic are the places where the show's humanity shows through. Regular Show premiered on Cartoon Network on September 6th, 2010, and aired its final episode, a regular epic final battle, on January 16th, 2017. In between, it produced 261 episodes across 8 seasons, a television movie, and a legacy that fundamentally changed what audiences expected from animated comedy. The show was created by J.G. Quintel, who developed its core concept from 2 student films he made at the California Institute of the Arts, The Naive Man from Lollyland, and 2 in the AM/PM. Those films contained the seeds of everything the show would become. The blend of mundane workplace comedy and surreal escalation. The visual simplicity masking emotional complexity. The casual absurdism that could pivot without warning into genuine pathos. What the films did not contain, because student films do not need it, was continuity. A 5-minute short can contradict itself without consequence. A 261 episode series cannot, and yet, Regular Show contradicts itself repeatedly, joyfully, and almost always in service of something more important than consistency. The plot holes in Regular Show are not evenly distributed. The early seasons, when the show was finding its voice and its rhythm, contain the most forgivable contradictions. A character survives something that should kill them. A skill appears and disappears between episodes. A timeline collapses under the weight of its own impossibility. These are the plot holes of a show that has not yet decided how seriously to take itself. The later seasons, when the show became more ambitious and more serialized, contained the more complex contradictions, the retcons, the selective memory, the consequences that persist in some episodes and evaporate in others. These are the plot holes of a show that has decided to take itself seriously, but cannot fully abandon the freedom that its earlier carelessness provided. And to see them clearly, you have to look at them in order, from the earliest and most forgivable to the latest and most difficult to ignore. The first is as old as the show itself, and it starts with a question that no one involved in the production has ever been able to answer satisfactorily. Before we go further, a quick note. The first of these plot holes begins in the very first episode of Regular Show, The Power, which aired on September 6th, 2010. In that episode, Rigby accidentally sends Skips to the moon using a magical keyboard that grants wishes when you sing into it. Later in the episode, Mordecai and Rigby themselves end up on the moon, along with Benson, Pops, and a group of baby ducks. They are standing on the lunar surface, exposed to the vacuum of space, with no helmets, no suits, and no visible means of survival. They do not suffocate. They do not freeze. They do not explode. They simply stand there, having a conversation, as though the moon were a slightly inconvenient parking lot. This would be unremarkable in most cartoons. Characters in animated comedies survive impossible situations all the time. But regular show is not most cartoons. The show established, repeatedly, and with increasing seriousness across its run, that its characters can die. Death is a recurring character in the show, literally appearing as a skeletal figure who collects souls and plays games for people's lives. Characters sustain injuries that carry consequences. The show's own movie reveals that an alternate timeline exists in which the main characters are killed. And in the series finale, Pops dies permanently, sacrificing himself to save the universe in a moment that is treated with genuine emotional weight. The show wants you to believe that death is real in its world, but in its very first episode, 6 characters survive the vacuum of space with no explanation, no consequences, and no acknowledgement that what just happened should have been fatal. The plot hole is not that they survived. Cartoons allow for that. The plot hole is that the show later established rules that make their survival impossible. If Skips can die from oxygen deprivation, as the movie suggests, then Skips should have died on the moon in the first episode. If High Five Ghost can be destroyed, then High Five Ghost was at risk. The show built a world where physical laws matter when the story needs them to matter, and ignored those same laws when the story needed a joke. This selective application of physics is the first and most fundamental contradiction in regular show's world building. Consider what the show later establishes about the limits of its characters' survival. In the Season 8 space arc, the characters live aboard a space station with life support systems. The show takes the time to depict airlocks, oxygen supplies, and the mechanics of living in space. If the characters can survive on the moon without any protection in episode 1, why do they need a space station in season 8? The answer is that the show's relationship with physics changed over time. Early regular show treated the laws of nature as optional, something to be invoked or ignored depending on what the episode required. Later regular show, particularly in the space season, treated physics with more respect because the story demanded it. The drama of living in space requires the threat of vacuum. The comedy of the first episode requires the freedom to ignore it. The plot hole is the distance between a show that was figuring out what it wanted to be and a show that eventually decided. There is a concept in literary criticism called the willing suspension of disbelief. The idea that audiences agree to accept unrealistic premises in exchange for a good story. Regular show asks for an unusually large suspension. You must accept that a blue jay and a raccoon can talk. You must accept that a gumball machine has feelings. You must accept that death plays video games and a Yeti works as a maintenance man. These are the baseline requirements. They are the cost of admission, and most audiences pay them gladly, because the characters are compelling and the stories are funny. But the moon plot hole asks for something beyond the baseline. It asks you to accept that the same universe where death is real is also a universe where people can breathe on the moon. The suspension of disbelief has a limit, and the limit is not about what is unrealistic. It is about what is inconsistent. Audiences will accept a talking raccoon. They will not as easily accept a talking raccoon who can survive in space in one episode, and who is threatened by oxygen deprivation in another. The issue is not the impossibility, it is the contradiction. Regular show's moon plot hole is also interesting because it is shared by many other animated shows. Characters in Looney Tunes, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Simpsons, and countless other animated comedies have survived conditions that should be fatal. The difference is that most of those shows never ask you to take their physics seriously. SpongeBob lives underwater and has a campfire. This is not a plot hole because the show never establishes that fire does not work underwater. It is a visual gag in a world where visual gags are the primary mode of communication. Regular show's moon scene would be the same kind of harmless gag if the show never established stakes. But the show did establish stakes. It spent 8 seasons building toward a finale where death is permanent and loss is real. And by doing so, it retroactively transformed a harmless gag into a plot hole. The moon scene did not become a plot hole when it aired. It became a plot hole when the finale aired, 7 years later. The plot hole was created in reverse, which is one of the strangest things a plot hole can do. The first episode is the first crack in the foundation. The first episode is the first crack in the foundation, and everything that follows is built on top of it. You are watching a show that told you death is real in the same universe where 6 characters once breathed on the moon. Both of those things cannot be true. The show never chose which one to believe, and so neither can you. The moon plot hole also introduces a question that will recur throughout this list. The question of what the audience is supposed to remember. When you watch the finale and see Pops die, are you supposed to remember that Mordecai and Rigby survived the vacuum of space in the first episode? If you do remember, the death loses some of its impact, because you know that the show's universe has precedent for ignoring fatal conditions. If you do not remember, the death hits harder, but your ignorance is a gift the show does not deserve, because it created the precedent it now needs you to forget. This is the paradox of the long-running show that changes its rules over time. The early episodes and the late episodes exist in the same continuity, but operate under different assumptions. Early regular show is a cartoon where anything can happen and nothing has consequences. Late regular show is a drama where actions have weight and loss is permanent. The audience is asked to hold both versions in their minds simultaneously, accepting the consequences when the show demands them, and ignoring the lack of consequences when the show requires it. The moon plot hole is the first and clearest example of this demand, and it sets the pattern for everything that follows. It is also worth noting that the moon scene is played entirely for comedy. The characters' reactions to being on the moon are not frightened or awed. They are annoyed. They treat the moon the way you might treat a traffic jam, an inconvenience rather than a life-threatening situation. This comedic framing is intentional. The show is telling you not to take the physics seriously, to enjoy the joke and move on. And for 6 seasons, that instruction works. You accept the cartoon logic and do not question it. The plot hole only becomes visible when the show changes its instructions and asks you to take the physics seriously. The moon scene is not a problem when it airs. It becomes a problem retroactively, when the show rewrites its own rules and the first episode suddenly does not fit. And the retroactive problem extends further than most viewers realize. The moon is not the only episode where characters survive conditions that the show's later logic says should kill them. In Meet Your Maker, Season 1, Episode 5, which aired on September 27th, 2010, the characters are trapped in a freezer and face hypothermia as a genuine threat. The cold is treated as dangerous. Their survival is uncertain. The show takes the physics of temperature seriously in that episode because the story requires it. But 3 weeks earlier, in The Power, the show treated the vacuum of space as a mild inconvenience. Cold kills, but vacuum does not. Gravity matters in some episodes and not in others. Fire is fatal on Tuesday and cosmetic on Thursday. The show's relationship with physics is not inconsistent by accident. It is inconsistent by design, because consistent physics would prevent most of the show's plots from functioning. This brings you to the fundamental question that the moon plot hole asks, but never answers. What kind of show is regular show? Is it a cartoon where physics are optional and survival is guaranteed, like Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry? Or is it a drama where the physical world has rules, and those rules can kill you, like the show's own finale suggests? The answer, obviously, is that it is both. It is a show that occupies a sliding scale between cartoon logic and dramatic realism, and it moves along that scale from episode to episode, sometimes from scene to scene, depending on what the story needs. The moon scene sits at one end of the scale. Pops' death sits at the other. Both are part of the same show, and the distance between them is the size of the plot hole. What makes the moon plot hole uniquely important is its position. It is in the first episode. It is the show's first impression. Before you know that regular show will make you cry, before you know that Pops will sacrifice himself, before you know that Mordecai and Rigby's friendship will be tested by genuine emotional betrayal, you see 6 characters standing on the moon without helmets, and surviving. That image tells you something about the show's rules. It tells you that this is a world where the impossible is casual, where death is unlikely, where the worst thing that can happen is that your boss yells at you. The pilot sets the terms of the contract between the show and the audience, and the terms are clear. Nothing here will hurt. Everything here is safe. The rest of the series spends 8 seasons renegotiating those terms, and the moon plot hole is the original clause that every renegotiation contradicts. The renegotiation happens gradually, so gradually that most viewers do not notice it until it is complete. In seasons 1 and 2, the show's relationship with danger is almost entirely comedic. Characters face threats that are escalated versions of everyday annoyances. A video game becomes sentient. A hot dog cart develops murderous intent. A pair of geese terrorize the park. The threats are absurd, and the show treats them absurdly. No one is genuinely at risk. The worst outcome is embarrassment or property damage, both of which are repaired by the next episode. The moon scene fits comfortably in this world because this world does not take survival seriously. By season 4, the renegotiation is underway. The stakes in individual episodes begin to feel more genuine. Death appears as a character with agency and menace. Skips' backstory is explored with a seriousness that earlier seasons would not have attempted. The romantic arcs between Mordecai and Margaret, and later Mordecai and CJ, introduce emotional stakes that persist across episodes in ways that the early show's supernatural threats never did. The show is still funny, still absurd, still capable of sending its characters into impossible situations and bringing them back unscathed. But the foundation beneath the absurdity is shifting. The show is teaching you to care about its characters in ways that make their survival more important and their endangerment more meaningful. By the final season, the renegotiation is complete. The space arc treats danger as genuinely life-threatening. The characters face enemies who want to kill them, not annoy them. The final battle against Antipops is fought with stakes that are explicitly existential, the destruction of the universe, and the resolution requires a sacrifice that is explicitly permanent. Pops dies. He does not come back. His death is treated with the emotional weight of a real death, mourned by characters who feel real grief, and memorialized in a montage that spans 25 years of the characters' future lives. The show that began with 6 characters surviving the vacuum of space in short sleeves ends with a character dying and staying dead. The distance between those 2 moments is the distance the show traveled across its run, and the moon plot hole marks the starting point of a journey whose destination would have been unimaginable at the time of departure. The second plot hole is more subtle, but arguably more damaging to the show's internal logic. It involves Skips, the immortal Yeti, who serves as the park's maintenance worker and the group's de facto problem solver. In the Season 2 episode, Skips vs. Technology, which aired on November 14th, 2011, Skips is depicted as completely incompetent with computers. He does not know how a mouse works. He cannot navigate a basic interface. The episode's entire premise is that Skips, despite being immortal and having centuries of accumulated knowledge, has somehow never learned to use a computer. The episode plays this for comedy, and the comedy works. Skips' frustration with technology is funny because it contrasts with his competencies in every other area of his life. But there is a problem. In the earlier episode Over the Top, which aired on April 4th, 2011, 7 months before Skips vs. Technology, Skips is shown using the internet without difficulty. He researches the Playco Armboy online, navigating web pages and processing information with no apparent struggle. He is not depicted as technologically illiterate. He is depicted as a person who knows how to use a computer, because in that episode, the story needed him to know. 7 months later, the story needed him not to know, and so he forgot. This is a continuity error in its purest form. A character who possesses a skill in one episode and has lost it in another with no explanation for the change. But it is also something deeper. Skips is the show's anchor of competence. He is the character who knows how everything works, who has seen everything before, who can solve any problem because he has been alive long enough to have encountered every possible variation of every possible crisis. His immortality is not just a character trait, it is a narrative function. When the show needs an answer, Skips provides it. When the show needs a solution, Skips has one. The moment the show depicts Skips as unable to use a computer, it undermines the fundamental premise of his character. If Skips does not know how a mouse works, what else does he not know? And if there are significant gaps in his knowledge, then his role as the infallible problem solver is a lie. And every episode where he saves the day by knowing the right thing at the right time is built on a foundation that the show itself has cracked. The deeper issue is that regular show used Skips as a narrative convenience. When the plot needed someone to explain the rules of a supernatural threat, Skips was there. When the plot needed someone to be helpless in the face of modern technology, Skips was there for that too. The character served the story rather than the story serving the character. And the result is a version of Skips who is simultaneously the most knowledgeable being in the park and a person who cannot operate a mouse. The plot hole is not just an error. It is a symptom of a show that prioritized individual episode premises over long-term character consistency. And the Skips technology contradiction is only the most visible instance of a broader pattern. Skips' knowledge base fluctuates throughout the series depending on what the episode needs from him. In some episodes, he has detailed knowledge of obscure supernatural threats, knowing their names, their weaknesses, and the exact rituals required to defeat them. In other episodes, he is baffled by threats that seem similar to ones he has defeated before. His competence is not a fixed characteristic. It is a variable, adjusted up or down to match the needs of each individual plot. This becomes particularly noticeable in the episodes where Skips serves as an exposition device. When the show needs to explain the rules of a new threat, Skips is the character who delivers the explanation. He pulls out an ancient book, or recalls a past encounter, or simply knows the answer because he has been alive for centuries. But the quality and specificity of his knowledge varies wildly. Sometimes he knows exactly what to do and can provide a step-by-step solution. Other times, he knows just enough to point the characters in the right direction while remaining unable to solve the problem himself. His knowledge level is calibrated to produce the most interesting episode, not to reflect a coherent history of learning and experience. The deeper issue here is that immortality, as a character trait, creates expectations that no episodic show can consistently meet. If Skips has been alive for centuries, he should know virtually everything. He should have encountered every threat, learned every skill, and accumulated a body of knowledge that makes him functionally omniscient. But a functionally omniscient character is a narrative problem. If Skips always knows the answer, there is no tension. If he can always solve the problem, there is no conflict. The show needed Skips to be wise enough to be useful, but ignorant enough to allow for danger. And it achieved this balance by making his knowledge inconsistent. The plot hole is the mechanism that keeps the show interesting. Without it, Skips would solve every problem in the first minute of every episode, and the remaining 10 minutes would be unnecessary. There is also the question of what Skips has been doing with his centuries of life. The show reveals that he became immortal to honor his deceased girlfriend Mona, and that he has spent his immortal life working various jobs and accumulating experience. But the show never seriously grapples with what it would mean to be alive for that long. Skips should have multiple lifetimes worth of skills, relationships, traumas, and memories. The character we see, a stoic maintenance worker who occasionally references his past, is a vastly simplified version of what an immortal being would actually be. The plot hole is not just about computers. It is about the impossibility of depicting immortality in an 11-minute comedy format. The show chose simplicity over accuracy, and the technology contradiction is the most visible symptom of that choice. Consider the broader implications of Skips' inconsistency for the show's treatment of expertise. Regular show has a clear hierarchy of competence. At the bottom are Mordecai and Rigby, who are unreliable, impulsive, and prone to making situations worse. In the middle is Benson, who understands the rules but lacks the power to enforce them. At the top is Skips, who possesses both knowledge and capability in seemingly unlimited quantities. This hierarchy drives the show's conflict structure. Problems are created by Mordecai and Rigby's incompetence, escalated by Benson's inability to contain them, and ultimately resolved by Skips' intervention. The technology plot hole disrupts this hierarchy because it places Skips, temporarily, at the bottom. If the character whose narrative function is to know everything suddenly does not know how to use a mouse. The audience's trust in the hierarchy wavers, and once that trust wavers, it becomes harder to accept Skips' competencies in later episodes at face value. There is also the question of what the show's writers intended with the technology episode. Skips versus. Technology is, at its core, a generational comedy. It draws on the real-world observation that older people sometimes struggle with new technology, and it applies that observation to a character who is not merely old, but functionally ancient. The joke is that even immortality cannot keep you current. The joke works because it trades on a recognizable cultural tension, the gap between accumulated wisdom and technological fluency that many viewers experience in their own families. Your grandfather may know more about life than you do, but he still needs help connecting to the Wi-Fi. Skips is that grandfather taken to an absurd extreme. He has survived wars, witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, and mastered every physical skill imaginable, but he cannot double-click. The comedy is effective. The problem is that effective comedy does not always produce consistent characterization. The writers of Skips versus Technology wrote the episode that was funniest, not the episode that was most consistent with over the top. And this is a choice that regular show makes repeatedly across its run, prioritizing the emotional or comedic needs of individual episodes over the cumulative logic of the series. In Skip's case, the cost is relatively low. The audience laughs at the technology episode and does not think about the internet research scene from 7 months earlier. The plot hole exists, but it is painless. It becomes significant only when you step back and look at the pattern. When you realize that the show's treatment of Skips is a microcosm of its treatment of continuity in general. Each episode asks you to accept the version of Skips that the story needs right now. The accumulation of those versions produces a character who is simultaneously omniscient and ignorant, capable and helpless, ancient and naive. He is not one character. He is dozens of characters wearing the same face, and the face is convincing enough that you rarely notice the switches. The technology contradiction also raises a philosophical question about the nature of knowledge itself. If you have been alive for centuries, what does it mean to know something? Does knowledge accumulated over 300 years include the ability to adapt to inventions that did not exist when that knowledge was formed? The show implicitly argues both sides. In most episodes, Skips' longevity is treated as a source of unlimited adaptability. He has seen it all, and therefore he can handle anything. But in Skips versus Technology, longevity becomes a limitation. He has been alive so long that the world has changed in ways his experience cannot accommodate. Both positions are defensible. Neither is consistent with the other, and the show never resolves the contradiction, because resolving it would require choosing one version of Skips over the other, which would eliminate either his role as the infallible problem solver or his potential as a source of comedy. The plot hole is preserved because both functions are too valuable to sacrifice. And there is one final detail about the Skips Technology plot hole that elevates it from simple continuity error to something more telling about the show's creative process. In the Season 5 episode Skips' Story, which aired on March 25th, 2013, the show provides a detailed account of Skips' past, revealing his origins, his relationship with Mona, and the circumstances of his immortality. The episode demonstrates that the writers were capable of maintaining long-term consistency when they chose to, that they could build a character backstory that enriched rather than contradicted earlier episodes. Skips' story does not contradict over the top or any other previous Skips episode. It deepens them. The technology plot hole, by contrast, contradicts without deepening. The difference suggests that the inconsistency is not a matter of capability, but of priority. When the writers considered a detail important to the character's identity, they maintained it. When they considered a detail expendable in service of a better joke, they discarded it. The technology plot hole tells you what the writers considered expendable, and in doing so, it tells you what they considered essential. The third plot hole involves the age of the show's main characters and the passage of time within the series. Mordecai and Rigby are stated to be 23 years old. This age is referenced multiple times throughout the show and is treated as a fixed fact of their identities. They are 23. They are young adults. They are at the beginning of their lives. But the show ran for 8 seasons across 7 years of real time. And within the show's narrative, time clearly passes. Seasons change. Holidays recur. Characters have birthdays. In the season 7 episode Birthday Gift, Mordecai is shown celebrating at least his 2nd birthday at the park, which means at least 2 years have passed since he started working there. If he was 23 when the show began, he should be at least 25 by season 7, and possibly older depending on how many off-screen birthdays occurred between depicted ones. But the show never updates the characters' ages. Mordecai is 23 in season 1, and 23 in season 7. Rigby is the same. The show's internal calendar acknowledges the passage of time through holidays, weather changes, and character milestones, but the characters themselves do not age. This is standard practice for many animated comedies. But regular show is unusual in how seriously it treats the consequences of time passing. Characters graduate from high school. Characters get married. Characters advance in their careers. The show expects you to believe that Rigby's journey from dropout to diploma represents genuine personal growth over a meaningful period of time, while simultaneously insisting that no time has passed at all because the characters are still the same age they were at the beginning. The plot hole becomes most visible in the context of the show's romantic arcs. Mordecai's relationship with Margaret spans approximately 4 seasons. His relationship with CJ spans approximately 2 more. The emotional weight of these arcs depends on the audience believing that real time is passing, that these relationships develop over months and years, not days and weeks. But if Mordecai is still 23 at the end of the CJ arc, then both relationships occurred within a single year of his life, which makes the show's treatment of them as epic, life-defining love stories feel disproportionate to their actual duration. The show cannot have it both ways. Either time passes and the characters age, or time does not pass and the relationships are not as significant as the show wants them to be. By refusing to choose, the show created a plot hole that undermines its own emotional stakes. The timeline problem extends to the seasonal inconsistency mentioned at the beginning of this essay. The Christmas special places the show firmly in December. Firework Run places it in July. Stake Me Amadeus, which airs near the end of season 4, takes place in what appears to be summer based on the weather and the characters' clothing. But the emotional arc of season 4 requires months of development between Mordecai and Margaret's first kiss and their breakup. If the season takes place over a few months, the arc is rushed. If it takes place over a year, the characters should be older. The show's refusal to establish a coherent timeline means that every emotional beat that depends on the passage of time is built on sand, and the sand shifts in different directions depending on which aspect of the show you examine. The romantic arcs need time to feel earned. The character growth needs time to feel real. The professional development needs time to feel meaningful. But the episodic format needs time to stand still. Because if too much time passes, the characters outgrow the premise. A 23-year-old slacker who avoids responsibility is relatable and funny. A 28-year-old slacker who avoids responsibility is concerning. The show needed its characters to stay young enough to justify their behavior, while experiencing enough life to justify their growth. Those two needs are fundamentally incompatible, and the frozen age is the show's attempt to have it both ways. The timeline plot hole also affects the show's depiction of the outside world. Margaret goes to college. This is treated as a significant life event that takes her away from the park and away from Mordecai. But college takes 4 years. If Mordecai is still 23 when Margaret leaves and still 23 when she returns, then no time has passed during her absence, which means she did not actually attend 4 years of college. The show avoids this problem by keeping Margaret off screen for a portion of her college years, and then bringing her back without specifying how much time has elapsed. But the audience knows how college works. 4 years is 4 years. And if 4 years passed, Mordecai should be 27. The show's refusal to age its characters turns every real-world milestone, graduation, career advancement, romantic maturation, into an event that happens in a temporal void. Perhaps the most telling evidence of the timeline plot hole is the finale's time jump. When the show jumps 25 years into the future, it shows the characters as visibly older. Mordecai has a family, Rigby has children. Everyone has aged in ways that are clearly depicted. This means the show's creators understood that aging is a meaningful part of life, and that depicting it adds emotional weight to a story. They chose to show aging in the finale because the finale needed the weight. They chose not to show aging during the series because the series needed the flexibility. The plot hole is the gap between the show's understanding of what makes a story meaningful and its unwillingness to apply that understanding to its own ongoing narrative. The age plot hole also has implications for the show's depiction of friendship, which is its most important theme. Mordecai and Rigby's friendship is the emotional core of the show. It is the relationship that everything else orbits around. The show argues, implicitly and sometimes explicitly, that this friendship is the most important thing in both characters' lives. But the depth and significance of a friendship is partly a function of time. A friendship that has lasted 2 years is meaningful. A friendship that has lasted 10 years is transformative. A friendship that has lasted a lifetime is defining. If Mordecai and Rigby are 23 throughout the series, their friendship at the park is relatively new. They have known each other since childhood, but their time as co-workers and roommates spans, at most, a few years. If they forged normally, their friendship would deepen with each passing season, accumulating shared history and shared loss in ways that the show could depict and the audience could feel. By keeping them 23, the show forfeits this accumulation. The friendship remains static in duration, even as it deepens emotionally. The finale's time jump attempts to compensate for this by showing the characters 25 years in the future, where the accumulated weight of their friendship is visible in the warmth and ease of their reunion. But the time jump is a shortcut. It gives you the destination without the journey. You see that Mordecai and Rigby's friendship survived for decades, but you do not see the decades. You do not see the middle-aged conversations, the shared holidays, the mutual support through career changes and family crises and personal losses. The show tells you the friendship endured. It does not show you how. And the gap between telling and showing is another manifestation of the timeline plot hole. The show wanted the emotional payoff of a lifelong friendship without doing the narrative work of depicting a lifelong friendship. The time jump is the shortcut that makes the payoff possible, but it is also an acknowledgement that the show's own format prevented it from earning the payoff honestly. There is also the question of how the frozen timeline affects the audience's perception of character growth. Regular show is frequently praised for its character development. Mordecai matures from an awkward, indecisive young man into someone capable of emotional honesty. Rigby grows from an irresponsible slacker into someone who earns a diploma, maintains a relationship, and takes responsibility for his actions. These arcs are real, and they are one of the show's greatest achievements. But character growth in the real world takes time. The growth the show depicts would require more time than the frozen timeline allows. If Mordecai goes through 3 major relationships and processes the emotional aftermath of each, that process should take years. If Rigby goes from dropout to diploma, the educational journey alone should take 1 to 2 years. The frozen timeline compresses all of this growth into a temporal space that is never defined, which means the audience can never fully gauge how much time the growth required or how realistic the pace of that growth actually is. The timeline plot hole is, in many ways, the most forgivable plot hole on this list, because it is the one most widely shared across animated television. The Simpsons has been on the air for over 35 years, and its characters have not aged a day. Regular show's version of the plot hole is notable not because it exists, but because the show tries so hard to work against it. The romantic arcs, the graduation storyline, the time jump. These are all attempts to inject the feeling of temporal progression into a format that does not allow for actual temporal progression. The show knows the timeline is a problem. It keeps trying to solve it. And the solutions, while emotionally effective, only highlight the problem further. There is one more dimension to the age plot hole that deserves attention, and it involves the show's treatment of physical space as a substitute for temporal passage. Because the characters do not age, the show uses changes in location to communicate the feeling of time moving forward. Mordecai and Rigby move from the park to the coffee shop to Margaret's college campus to CJ's apartment. These changes of scenery function as temporal markers, giving the audience the impression that life is progressing, even though the characters' faces never change. The space station arc in the final season is the most extreme version of this technique. By physically removing the characters from the park and placing them in an entirely new environment, the show communicates that something fundamental has shifted without having to show that shift on the characters' bodies. The environment ages even if the characters do not. The park changes seasons. The coffee shop closes. The locations the characters visit accumulate like rings on a tree, invisible on the surface, but countable if you look at the cross-section. This spatial substitution is clever, but it has limits. Eventually, the audience notices that the characters look exactly the same in the final episode as they do in the pilot. Despite having experienced 7 years of emotional growth, multiple romantic relationships, at least one death and resurrection, a journey to space, and a final battle for the fate of the universe. The finale addresses this by including a montage set 25 years in the future, where the characters are finally shown as older, changed, visually marked by the passage of time. It is the only moment in the entire series where the timeline plot hole is explicitly acknowledged and resolved. The characters aged, time passed, the frozen clock started ticking, and it happens in the last 5 minutes of the show, which means the resolution comes too late to affect the experience of watching the other 260 episodes. The plot hole persists for the duration of the series and is retroactively corrected by its ending, which is perhaps the most regular show solution imaginable. The timeline plot hole connects to something even more fundamental about the experience of watching animated television over long periods of time. You, as a viewer, are aging while the characters are not. You watched the first episode of regular show at a certain point in your life, and you watched the last episode at a different point. Your face changed. Your circumstances changed. Your relationship with the show changed. But Mordecai and Rigby looked exactly the same. Their voices sounded the same. Their faces had the same proportions, the same colors, the same lines. The frozen timeline is not just a plot hole in the show's internal logic. It is a plot hole in the relationship between the show and its audience. You grew up with these characters, but they did not grow up with you. The emotional connection is real, but it is asymmetrical. You changed, and they did not. And the gap between your reality and theirs is the timeline plot hole experienced from the audience's side. This asymmetry is part of why the finale's time jump montage is so powerful. For the first time in 261 episodes, the show acknowledges the gap. It shows Mordecai and Rigby as older, as changed, as marked by time. Mordecai becomes a painter with a family. Rigby becomes a father. They both have gray in their hair and new lives that the audience has not been part of. The montage is bittersweet because it closes the timeline plot hole at the cost of the audience's connection. For 8 seasons, you knew these characters. You knew their daily lives, their routines, their jokes. The montage jumps 25 years into a future where you do not know them anymore. The timeline plot hole is resolved, but the resolution separates you from the characters in a way that the plot hole never did. The frozen timeline kept you close to Mordecai and Rigby because it kept them the same age as your memory of them. The resolution aged them past your knowing, and the distance it created is permanent. Regular Show is not the only animated show to end with a time jump. Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, and Steven Universe all employ some version of the technique. But Regular Show's version is notable for how directly it addresses the audience's relationship with the timeline plot hole. The other shows use time jumps to show consequences and futures. Regular Show uses its time jump to acknowledge that the characters were frozen, and then, in the last 5 minutes, unfreezes them. It is the show's final act of honesty, an admission that the timeline was always broken, and that the only way to fix it was to skip ahead to a point where the brokenness no longer matters. The characters aged, the damage is done, the plot hole is sealed, but the sealant is made of loss. The fourth plot hole is one of the most debated among fans, and it involves Rigby's educational history. In the Season 2 episode, More Smarter, which aired on September 26th, 2011, it is revealed that Rigby never finished high school. He is described as a dropout, someone who chose to leave school before completing his education. This is consistent with Rigby's character as established in the first 2 seasons, a slacker who avoids responsibility and takes shortcuts. The dropout detail adds depth to his relationship with Mordecai, who did complete his education, and it explains the intellectual gap between them that the show frequently plays for comedy. But in regular show, the movie, which premiered on November 25th, 2015, the backstory is different. The movie reveals that both Mordecai and Rigby were expelled from high school after a science experiment went wrong. They did not choose to leave. They were forced out. This is a fundamentally different narrative. A dropout is someone who gave up. An expelled student is someone who was removed against his will. The emotional meaning of Rigby's educational failure changes completely depending on which version you believe. In the series, Rigby is responsible for his own lack of education. In the movie, he is a victim of circumstances that were partly Mordecai's fault. The show attempts to reconcile these two versions by having Mordecai imply that he managed to finish his education through alternative means, while Rigby did not. This explanation technically works, but it requires the audience to accept that the show's earlier, simpler explanation that Rigby dropped out was either incomplete or misleading. The movie rewrites the past without fully acknowledging that the past was already written, and it does so in service of a dramatic revelation, Rigby's forged rejection letter, that depends on the audience accepting the new version of events over the old one. And it illustrates a broader challenge that all long-running animated shows face. When a show runs for 8 seasons, the early episodes become ancient history. The writers who created Rigby's dropout backstory in Season 2 may not have been the same writers who crafted the movie's expulsion backstory in 2015. The institutional memory of a writing staff changes over time, and details that seemed important in Season 2 may have been forgotten or deprioritized by the time the movie was in development. This is not an excuse, it is an explanation. The Rigby education plot hole exists because the show's creative team changed, evolved, and revised its understanding of the character over a period of years, and the revisions were not always consistent with what came before. This kind of retroactive revision is sometimes called a retcon, short for retroactive continuity, and it is a common tool in serialized storytelling. Comic books do it constantly. Television shows do it regularly. Films do it when sequels rewrite the rules established by their predecessors. The key to a successful retcon is that the new version of events must be at least as convincing as the old version, and ideally more so. The Rigby retcon is partially successful. The movie's version of events is more dramatically interesting than the series version, because it adds the dimension of Mordecai's complicity and the emotional weight of the forged rejection letter. But it is not fully successful, because it contradicts established facts without fully acknowledging the contradiction. A great retcon makes you forget the old version. The Rigby retcon makes you remember both versions and wonder which one is true. The plot hole is not a minor continuity error. It is a fundamental contradiction in one of the show's most important character arcs. The plot hole is not a minor continuity error. It is a fundamental contradiction in one of the show's most important character arcs. Rigby's journey from educational failure to earning his diploma in the Season 7 episode Rigby's Graduation Day Special is one of the show's most emotionally satisfying storylines. But the emotional power of that storyline depends on understanding why Rigby did not have a diploma in the first place. If he dropped out, the diploma represents a choice to finish what he started. If he was expelled, the diploma represents overcoming an injustice. The show tells both stories and asks you to feel both emotions, and the result is a character whose past is incoherent, even as his present is deeply moving. The incoherence extends to the specific details of the backstory. In the series, Rigby's lack of a diploma is presented as a long-standing fact of his life, something he has lived with for years, and that defines his relationship with Mordecai and with himself. When he tells people he does not have a diploma, it is with the weariness of someone who has carried this weight for a long time. But in the movie, the expulsion happened at the same time as the science experiment that sent them through time, which means both Mordecai and Rigby were expelled simultaneously. If they were both expelled, why does Mordecai have a diploma and Rigby does not? The movie suggests Mordecai found an alternative path to completion, but the show never depicted this. There is no episode where Mordecai studies for a GED. There is no reference to him completing his education through night school or correspondence courses. The show simply asserts that Mordecai has a diploma, because the show needs him to be the more successful member of the duo, and it never explains how he got it. The Rigby education plot hole is particularly painful because it undermines one of the show's best storylines. In the Season 7 special Rigby's Graduation Day special, Rigby returns to high school as an adult student and earns his diploma. The episode is a genuine triumph, a moment where a character who has been defined by his failures finally succeeds at something that matters. Eileen attends the ceremony. The park staff cheers. The audience feels the weight of a journey that has spanned multiple seasons. But the journey's starting point is unclear. Did Rigby drop out, as the series says, or was he expelled, as the movie says? The graduation means something different, depending on which origin story you accept. If he dropped out, the graduation is a choice to finish what he abandoned. If he was expelled, the graduation is an act of defiance against a system that rejected him. The show wants both meanings, and by wanting both, it fully achieves neither. There is also the matter of timing. The movie was released in November 2015, between seasons 6 and 7. This means the retconned backstory was introduced midway through the show's run, after the original backstory had been established for 4 seasons. Fans who had spent years understanding Rigby as a dropout were suddenly asked to understand him as an expelled student. The transition was not smooth. The movie's version of events was more dramatic, more complicated, and more emotionally charged than the original version. But it also contradicted what the audience already believed. The plot hole is not just a production error. It is a betrayal of the audience's existing relationship with the character, a relationship the show itself had cultivated for years before deciding to change the terms. What makes the Rigby education plot hole particularly instructive is the way it reveals the tension between episodic character writing and movie-scale storytelling. More Smarter is an 11-minute episode. It needs a simple, clean backstory detail that can be established quickly and used for comedy. Rigby dropped out of high school. That is a one-sentence backstory. It communicates everything the audience needs to know in under 5 seconds. It tells you that Rigby is lazy, that he made bad decisions, and that his lack of education is his own fault. The episode uses this information efficiently and moves on. Regular show. The movie operates on a completely different scale. It needs a backstory that can sustain an hour-plus narrative, generate emotional conflict between the 2 lead characters, and provide a dramatic revelation that recontextualizes their entire friendship. A dropout backstory cannot do any of those things. A dropout chose to leave. There is no betrayal, no secret, no dramatic reveal in the fact that someone chose not to finish school. But an expulsion, combined with a forged rejection letter that prevented one friend from attending college, that is a backstory that can carry a movie. It has deception, guilt, sacrifice, and the kind of long-buried secret that generates genuine dramatic tension when it is finally uncovered. The movie's backstory is objectively better as a piece of dramatic writing. It is more complex, more emotionally resonant, and more useful for generating conflict than the simpler version, but it achieves those qualities at the cost of consistency. The show spent 4 seasons teaching you one thing about Rigby, and then the movie taught you something different. And because the movie is a larger, more prestigious piece of content, it implicitly asks you to accept its version as the correct one, to treat More Smarter's simpler characterization as the mistake, rather than treating the movie's retcon as the contradiction. This hierarchy of canon, where movies outrank episodes, and later revelations outrank earlier ones, is common in franchise storytelling, but rarely examined. The assumption is that the most recent and most elaborate version of a character's backstory is the definitive one, and that earlier, simpler versions were merely incomplete. But there is an argument to be made that the simpler version was more honest. A Rigby who dropped out is a Rigby whose failures are entirely his own. That characterization gives his eventual growth more weight, because every accomplishment is an act of overcoming his own choices. A Rigby who was expelled is a Rigby whose failures were partly imposed on him. His growth is still meaningful, but less purely self-generated. The show and the movie are telling 2 different stories about personal responsibility, and neither acknowledges the other's existence. The education plot hole is, in the end, a plot hole about stories themselves, about how a narrative changes when you give it more time and more space. 11 minutes produces one Rigby, 90 minutes produces another. Both are valid. Both are well written. They simply cannot coexist, and the show never gave the audience a framework for choosing between them. The Rigby education plot hole also illuminates a broader trend in regular show's approach to its secondary character arcs. Rigby is the show's most dynamic character. He changes more than anyone else across the show's 8 seasons, growing from a selfish, irresponsible slacker into a person capable of commitment, sacrifice, and genuine self-improvement. His journey from dropout or expelled student, depending on which version you accept, to high school graduate is one of the most satisfying character arcs in modern animation. The diploma he earns in the Season 5 episode Rigby's Graduation Day Special, which aired on August 14th, 2014, is a genuinely moving moment because it represents years of accumulated growth. You have watched this character fail, make excuses, deflect responsibility, and gradually, painfully, begin to try. The diploma is the proof that trying matters, that growth is possible, that even a person who started at the bottom can climb if they decide to. But the movie complicates that climb in ways that the show's earlier storytelling does not anticipate. If Rigby was expelled, then his path back to education was always partially a correction of an injustice. He was removed from the system through no fault of his own, and his return to the system is an act of reclamation as much as self-improvement. If Rigby dropped out, his return is entirely self-generated. He left because he chose to, and he came back because he chose to. The first version is a story about overcoming external obstacles. The second is a story about overcoming internal ones. Both are powerful. They are not the same story. The forged rejection letter revelation in the movie adds another layer. Rigby discovers that he was accepted to a college, and that Mordecai, out of fear of losing his friend, forged a rejection letter to prevent Rigby from attending. This means that Rigby's entire adult trajectory, his lack of education, his dead-end job at the park, his years of wasted potential, was partly caused by his best friend's deception. The emotional impact of this revelation is enormous. It reframes the entire Mordecai-Rigby friendship as one founded on a betrayal, but it also requires you to accept the movie's version of their shared history, which contradicts the simpler version the series had been telling for 4 seasons. The plot hole is not just about Rigby's education. It is about whether Mordecai is fundamentally a good friend who sometimes makes mistakes, or a person who committed a serious act of sabotage and was never held accountable for it until the movie demanded a dramatic climax. The 5th plot hole involves Pops Maillard, the cheerful, childlike owner of the park who is revealed in the final season to be something far more significant than anyone, including Pops himself, understood. In the Season 8 episode The Ice Tape, Mr. Maillard reveals that Pops is not his biological son. Pops is an alien being, the embodiment of pure good, who arrived on Earth via meteor and was found by Mr. Maillard during one of his expeditions. Pops is destined to be at war with his twin brother Anti-Pops, the embodiment of pure evil, and this conflict has been repeating across multiple cycles of universal creation and destruction for as long as the universe has existed. This revelation is dramatically effective. It reframes everything you know about Pops and gives the finale enormous cosmic stakes. But it creates a timeline contradiction that the show never resolves. Earlier episodes establish that Pops was born sometime between 1879 and 1910, placing him in the late 19th or early 20th century. He is depicted as having grown up on Earth, having memories of earthly childhood experiences, and having a relationship with Mr. Maillard that spans decades. But the Ice Tape revelation says that Pops is as old as the universe itself, possibly older, because the universe has reset multiple times, and Pops has existed through every cycle. Both of these things cannot be true simultaneously. Either Pops was born on Earth in the late 1800s and is approximately 130 years old at the time of the show, or Pops has existed for billions of years across multiple universal cycles and simply happened to land on Earth during one of those cycles. The show appears to intend the second explanation, but it never reconciles this with the earlier episodes that depict Pops as having a specific, finite history on Earth. If Pops has been fighting Anti-Pops since the beginning of time, what was he doing for the billions of years before he arrived on Earth? Does he retain memories of previous cycles? If so, Why does he behave like a naive, childlike man who does not understand basic human customs? And if he does not retain memories, then in what meaningful sense is he the same entity who has existed since the beginning of time? The show's answer to these questions is silence. The revelation is presented, its dramatic purpose is served, and the contradictions are left for the audience to resolve on their own. This is not unusual for a cartoon that is primarily concerned with entertainment, rather than philosophical consistency. But the finale asks the audience to care deeply about Pops' sacrifice, to feel the weight of a being who has fought the same battle across infinite cycles, finally choosing to end the cycle through love rather than violence. That emotional weight depends on believing the cosmic backstory, and the cosmic backstory contradicts the earthly backstory. The plot hole sits at the center of the show's most important moment, and the show's response is to hope that the emotion is strong enough to make you forget the logic. And for most viewers, it works. The finale is one of the most emotionally powerful episodes in the show's history, and Pops' sacrifice resonates regardless of the timeline contradiction. But the plot hole still exists, and it is worth considering why the show created it. The answer, almost certainly, is that the Cosmic Pops storyline was not planned from the beginning. Early regular show treats Pops as a comedic character, a wealthy, naive man who says old-fashioned things and does not understand modern social norms. His Lollyland origins are hinted at, but never explored in depth. The idea of Pops as a cosmic being, as old as the universe, locked in an eternal struggle with his evil twin, is a late-season invention. A way to give the show's ending the scale and significance that a simple park-based finale could not provide. This is not a criticism. The Cosmic Pops storyline is brilliant, and the decision to expand the show's mythology for the finale was the right one. But the expansion came at the cost of consistency. The Pops of seasons 1 through 6 is a fundamentally different character from the Pops of season 8. Early Pops is funny because he is out of place in the modern world. Late Pops is tragic because he carries the weight of infinite cosmic cycles. The show asks you to hold both versions in your mind simultaneously, to see the funny old man and the tragic cosmic being as the same person. This is a lot to ask, and the show does not entirely earn it. The timeline contradiction is the visible seam where the two versions of Pops were stitched together. There is also the question of Mr. Maillard's role in the deception. If Maillard knew that Pops was an alien being of cosmic significance, why did he allow Pops to live as a sheltered, naive park owner's son? Why did he not prepare Pops for the battle with anti-Pops? Why did he keep the truth hidden for so long? The show provides some answers, suggesting that Maillard was trying to give Pops a normal life for as long as possible. But this explanation raises further questions. If Maillard knew the cosmic battle was inevitable, his decision to keep Pops in the dark was not protective. It was reckless. It meant that when the truth finally came, Pops was completely unprepared for the most important event in the history of the universe. The plot hole extends from Pops' timeline to Maillard's motivations, and from Maillard's motivations to the show's overall approach to its own mythology. The Pops plot hole is representative of a common challenge in serialized storytelling, the challenge of escalation. When a show runs for 8 seasons, the stakes need to escalate to maintain audience interest. What starts as a show about two friends trying to avoid work needs to become a show about something larger, something that justifies the audience's continued investment of time and attention. Regular show's solution to the escalation problem was to embed cosmic significance in a character who had previously been pure comedy. Pops, the funny old man who says good show and does not understand modern technology, becomes the key to the fate of the universe. The escalation is dramatic and effective, but it is also destabilizing, because the character cannot be both things simultaneously without contradiction. The challenge is that Pops' cosmic nature should change how you understand every episode he appears in. If Pops is a being of infinite cosmic power, then every scene where he struggles with a minor task, fails to understand a social situation, or behaves in a childlike manner becomes a scene where a cosmic being is inexplicably helpless. The show's answer would be that Pops does not know he is cosmic, that his memories of previous cycles are suppressed, and that he genuinely experiences the world as a naive, cheerful man. This is an acceptable answer, but it raises the further question of why a being of cosmic power would lose access to his own nature. If the universe designed Pops to defeat anti-Pops, why did the universe also design him to forget his purpose? The amnesia plot hole sits inside the timeline plot hole, and both sit inside the larger question of whether the show's cosmic mythology was planned from the beginning or improvised near the end. The answer, based on available evidence, is that the mythology was largely improvised. The early seasons of regular show contain no hints of Pops' cosmic significance. He is a comedic character, full stop. The cosmic elements emerge in Season 7 and are fully developed in Season 8, which is when the show knew it was ending and needed a mythology large enough to support a satisfying conclusion. The improvisation is not a criticism. Many of the best stories in television are improvised, built in real time by writers responding to the needs of the current season rather than executing a predetermined plan. Breaking Bad's most celebrated moments were not planned from the first episode. The Wire's greatest storylines emerged from the writers' growing understanding of their characters. Regular show's Pops mythology belongs to this tradition of emergent storytelling, where the best ideas arrive not at the beginning, but in the middle, when the show has accumulated enough material to discover what it has been building toward. But emergent storytelling produces plot holes that planned storytelling does not. When the Pops mythology emerged in Season 7, it had to be retrofitted onto 6 seasons of existing material. The retrofitting was not complete. The timeline contradiction is the most visible evidence of the incomplete fit, but there are others. The question of why the Guardians of Eternal Youth, who interact with Skips regularly, never mention Pops' cosmic nature. The question of why the supernatural threats that plague the park are never connected to Pops' presence. The question of why baby ducks and the other cosmic entities the show introduces never reference the cycle of creation and destruction that Pops is central to. The mythology works as a standalone story in Season 8. It does not fully integrate with the 7 seasons that preceded it. The plot hole is the seam where the mythology was stitched onto the show, and the stitching, while skilled, is visible if you look closely enough. The Pops origin plot hole also forces you to reconsider the show's emotional register in a way that is difficult to undo. For 6 seasons, Pops is the show's comic relief. He is the character whose naivety generates humor, whose childlike wonder contrasts with the cynicism of the other characters, whose inability to understand basic social situations provides a consistent source of gentle comedy. He is funny because he does not understand the world. He is endearing because his confusion is genuine. The cosmic revelation reframes all of that confusion. If Pops is a being whose consciousness has been wiped and reset across countless cycles of universal creation, his naivety is not a personality trait. It is a symptom of cosmic amnesia. His childlike wonder is not charming. It is tragic. He does not understand the world because his understanding has been deliberately erased, and the version of him you have been laughing at for 6 seasons is a diminished remnant of a being whose full self would be unrecognizable. The show wants you to feel this tragedy in the finale, and many viewers do, but the tragedy retroactively changes the comedy, and the plot hole is the mechanism by which that change occurs. You cannot laugh at Pops the same way after you know what he really is, and the show did not warn you that the joke was going to become a eulogy. There is also the matter of Mr. Maillard's knowledge. Maillard is Pops' adoptive father and the park's owner. The finale reveals that Maillard knew about Pops' cosmic nature, that he adopted Pops specifically to protect him, that the park itself was constructed as a kind of shelter for a being whose true significance was hidden from everyone else. This revelation means that Maillard's behavior across the entire series, his gruffness, his seeming indifference, his obsessive control over the park, was motivated by a secret that the audience did not share. Every interaction between Maillard and Benson, every budget decision, every seemingly arbitrary management choice was informed by knowledge that the show withheld from the audience for 7 seasons. The plot hole here is not factual, but emotional. The audience's relationship with Maillard was based on incomplete information, and the completion of that information does not clarify the character so much as replace him with a different character entirely. The sixth plot hole involves Thomas, the park's quiet intern, who is revealed in the Season 6 special, The Real Thomas, which aired on November 6, 2014, to be a Russian spy named Nikolai. The revelation is one of the show's best twists, turning a background character into the center of a tense, emotionally complex special episode. But it creates a retroactive problem for every episode Thomas appeared in between his introduction in the Season 4 premiere Exit 9B and his unmasking in Season 6. Thomas was introduced as a new intern hired by Benson. He appeared in numerous episodes across 2 seasons, participating in the group's adventures, interacting with the other characters, and generally behaving like a normal, if somewhat shy, young man. After The Real Thomas, you are asked to believe that every one of those appearances was a performance, that Thomas was secretly gathering intelligence for the Russian government, while appearing to do yard work and hang out with talking animals in a park. The show wants you to re-watch those episodes with the knowledge that Thomas was lying the entire time. The problem is that Thomas's behavior in those earlier episodes does not support the spy reading. He does not avoid surveillance. He does not communicate with handlers. He does not gather information in any visible way. He behaves exactly like an intern because when those episodes were written, that is exactly what he was. The spy reveal was not planned from Thomas's introduction. It was a creative decision made later, retroactively imposed on a character whose earlier appearances were written without it in mind. The plot hole is not in The Real Thomas itself, which is a well-crafted episode. The plot hole is in the gap between the character as originally conceived and the character as retroactively rewritten. This kind of retroactive revision is common in serialized television. Characters are given new backstories that reframe their earlier behavior, but it works best when the earlier behavior can plausibly be reinterpreted in light of the new information. Thomas's earlier appearances cannot be plausibly reinterpreted because there is nothing in them to reinterpret. He is not secretive. He is not observant. He is not gathering data. He is an intern who does intern things. The spy reading requires you to believe that the most effective intelligence operative in the Russian government's park stealing program spent 2 seasons doing nothing that advanced his mission. The plot hole is the gap between the spy we are told Thomas was and the intern we actually watched him be. And this gap is not something that can be resolved by rewatching the episodes with new eyes. In the best retroactive reveals, like the twist in The Sixth Sense or the reveal in Fight Club, the earlier scenes contain subtle clues that make the reveal feel inevitable in retrospect. You re-watch and you see the signs that were always there. Thomas's pre-reveal episodes contain no such signs. He does not give knowing looks. He does not avoid certain conversations. He does not behave in any way that suggests a hidden agenda. He is, in every measurable way, exactly what he appears to be. The reveal does not recontextualize his earlier appearances. It contradicts them. This is not to say that The Real Thomas is a bad episode. It is, by most accounts, one of the best episodes in the series. The dramatic tension of Thomas's unmasking, the moral complexity of his decision to betray both Russia and the United States to save his friends, and the bittersweet ending where he goes on the run are all handled with skill and emotional intelligence. The episode works as a self-contained story. The plot hole only becomes visible when you try to place the episode within the larger context of the series. The Thomas plot hole also raises questions about the show's other characters. If Thomas could hide a secret identity for 2 seasons, who else might be hiding something? The show does not explore this possibility, which is probably wise, because exploring it would undermine the audience's trust in every character. But the question lingers. If the show can retroactively rewrite one character's entire history, it could theoretically do the same to any character. The Thomas reveal established a precedent that the show chose not to follow, but the precedent exists. The plot hole is not just about Thomas. It is about the stability of character identity in a show that has demonstrated its willingness to change that identity without warning. What makes the Thomas situation particularly interesting from a production standpoint is that it reveals how regular shows writers thought about character. Thomas was created as a background character, someone to fill out the park's roster without taking focus from the main cast. He had no planned arc, no hidden depths, and no secret identity. When the writers decided to give him one, they were making a creative decision that served the immediate needs of a single episode at the expense of the character's established history. This is the same trade-off the show makes in many of its plot holes. Immediate impact over long-term consistency. The feeling of the moment over the logic of the whole. Thomas's spy reveal is the plot hole that most clearly demonstrates this philosophy, because it is the one where the trade-off is most visible and most difficult to reconcile. There is another dimension to this plot hole that is worth examining, and it involves the audience's relationship with background characters in general. Regular show has a large ensemble cast, but the show's focus is almost entirely on 5 or 6 characters. Thomas, before his reveal, existed in the periphery. He was present but rarely essential. He spoke but rarely drove the plot. He occupied the same narrative space as the park's other background elements: the snack bar, the cart, the fountain. He was scenery that occasionally had lines. And this is precisely what makes the spy reveal both effective and problematic. It is effective because it takes something you are not paying attention to and makes it the most important thing in the room. It is problematic because the thing you were not paying attention to was not designed to bear that weight. The real Thomas asks you to reconsider every moment Thomas was on screen, but most of those moments are so brief and so unremarkable that there is nothing to reconsider. He stands in the background during a group scene. He helps clean the park. He rides in the cart. These are not moments that contain hidden meaning. They are moments that contain nothing, because the character was not yet a character. He was a placeholder, a body to fill the frame. And the spy reveal tries to retroactively fill that body with intention. The gap between what was intended and what is retroactively claimed is the plot hole, and no amount of clever writing in the real Thomas can close it. This raises a fascinating question about how stories are built in collaborative writing rooms. Regular show was not written by a single author with a master plan. It was written by a team of writers who worked episode by episode, season by season, responding to creative impulses and network demands and their own evolving interests. Thomas's creation was one decision. His spy reveal was a different decision made by potentially different writers at a different time with different goals. The plot hole is the seam between those two decisions, visible only because the show asked you to look at both of them at the same time. In a purely episodic show, the seam would be invisible. In a purely serialized show, the seam would not exist. Regular show, occupying its characteristic middle ground, exposes the seam and asks you to accept it. The spy reveal also creates a tonal contradiction that the show never fully addresses. Before the real Thomas, the show's threats were supernatural. Monsters, demons, interdimensional beings, sentient objects with malicious intent. The show existed in a heightened reality where danger came from magical sources. Thomas's espionage introduces a real-world threat into this supernatural framework. Russian intelligence agencies are not monsters or demons. They are real organizations with real agendas. And their inclusion in a cartoon about talking animals working in a park creates a dissonance that the show papers over with humor, but never resolves. The episode works as entertainment because it moves quickly and the stakes feel genuine, but it does not work as world building because it introduces a category of threat that does not belong in the show's established universe. If foreign intelligence agencies exist in the regular show universe and are aware of the park, then the park's supernatural events should have attracted government attention long before Thomas was planted there. The fact that they apparently did not, that Thomas's mission seems to be the first and only instance of governmental interest in a location where reality-bending events occur on a weekly basis, is itself a plot hole nested inside the larger plot hole. And then there is the question of what happened after the reveal. Thomas saves the park, his cover is blown, and he leaves. The show moves on. The other characters process the betrayal briefly and then return to their routines. But the emotional implications of the reveal are enormous. These characters trusted Thomas. They worked with him. They considered him a friend. Learning that his entire presence was a deception should produce lasting psychological effects. Trust issues, paranoia, grief, for a friendship that turned out to be fictional. The show gives these emotions approximately one episode's worth of attention before discarding them. The reset is familiar by this point in the analysis. Regular show acknowledges big emotional moments and then allows the status quo to absorb them. But the Thomas reset is more jarring than most, because the betrayal is more personal than most. A monster attacking the park is an external threat. A friend who was never really a friend is an internal one. The show treats both with the same narrative impermanence, and the Thomas plot hole is where that impermanence is most difficult to accept. The Thomas plot hole also raises questions about the show's relationship with real-world geopolitics that are worth considering, even briefly. Regular Show is a show set in a cartoon park populated by talking animals and sentient gumballs. The introduction of Russian espionage into this world is a tonal leap that the show makes with confidence, but never fully justifies. The Real Thomas episode aired on November 6th, 2014, during a period of heightened real-world tensions between the United States and Russia, following Russia's annexation of Crimea earlier that year. Whether the show's writers intended to tap into that zeitgeist is unclear, but the episode's use of Russian intelligence as the antagonist places Regular Show in a geopolitical context that its other episodes carefully avoid. Monsters from other dimensions are politically neutral. Foreign intelligence agencies are not. The choice to make Thomas a Russian spy, rather than, say, a spy from another dimension, or a rogue magical organization, is a choice that anchors the episode in a specific real-world framework. And that framework does not comfortably coexist with the rest of the show's mythology. There is also the matter of what the Thomas reveal does to the audience's trust in the show itself, not just in the characters. When a show reveals that a background character was secretly something else the entire time, it is making a promise about the depth of its own planning. It is saying, implicitly, that this was always the intention, that the writers had this in mind from the beginning, that the reveal is the culmination of a long-term plan. But the Thomas reveal was not planned from the beginning. Thomas was created as a background character with no predetermined arc. The reveal was a creative decision made years after his introduction, and the show presents it as though it were the plan all along. This is a small deception, and most viewers accept it without question, but it establishes a precedent. If the show can retroactively claim that a background character was always a spy, it can retroactively claim anything about any character. The audience's trust in the reliability of the narrative, in the idea that what the show tells you is true until it explicitly tells you otherwise, is weakened by the Thomas reveal. And once that trust is weakened, every future reveal carries slightly less weight, because the audience knows that the show is capable of rewriting its own history to serve the needs of a single episode. The seventh plot hole involves the show's treatment of consequences across its episodic structure. Regular Show established a pattern in which extraordinary events occur within individual episodes, events that should have permanent, world-altering consequences, and are then completely forgotten by the next episode. Buildings are destroyed and rebuilt. The park is transported to different dimensions and returned. Characters die and are resurrected. Cosmic threats are defeated and never referenced again. Each episode resets the status quo, and the next episode begins as though the previous one's events never happened. This is again standard for episodic animated comedy. But Regular Show is not purely episodic. It has ongoing arcs, developing relationships, and a continuity that becomes increasingly important in later seasons. The show asks you to remember that Mordecai and Margaret kissed, that Rigby does not have a diploma, that Thomas was a spy, that Benson has a temper rooted in personal disappointment. It asks you to track emotional continuity while ignoring narrative continuity. The plot hole is the inconsistency of the show's own memory. Some events carry forward, others do not, and the show never establishes a rule for which events persist and which are erased. Consider the specific case of the park's destruction. In multiple episodes, the park is severely damaged or destroyed. Buildings collapse. Structures are vaporized. The ground itself is torn apart. By any reasonable accounting, the park should be in a perpetual state of reconstruction, with insurance claims, budget crises, and physical evidence of repeated catastrophic events. But the park resets to its pristine state between episodes. The tree where Mordecai and Rigby sit is always intact. The house always has 4 walls. The cart always starts. The park exists in a state of perpetual renewal that contradicts the show's own depiction of destruction. The plot hole becomes most visible in the later seasons, when the show's serialized elements become more prominent. In Season 8, the show expects you to take the threat of antipops seriously because the stakes are real. Characters can die. The universe can end. But the show has spent 7 seasons teaching you that nothing is permanent, that destruction is always followed by restoration, that consequences are suggestions rather than rules. When the finale asks you to believe that Pops' sacrifice is final and irreversible, it is asking you to believe something that the show's own history has taught you not to believe. The plot hole is not a single missing piece. It is the gap between the show's episodic logic and its serialized ambition. But the 7th plot hole cuts even deeper when you examine specific instances. Take the Season 3 episode Exit 9B, which serves as the Season 4 premiere. In that episode, the park is invaded by resurrected villains from previous episodes. Characters who were definitively destroyed in earlier stories return without explanation, brought back by the villain GBF Jr. The episode treats their return as a dramatic event, which it is. But it also raises the question of why. If these villains can be brought back by one person with the right motivation, they have not been brought back before. The show established that these villains were defeated permanently. Exit 9B tells you that permanent means until someone decides otherwise. And if permanent defeat is reversible, then no defeat in the show's history has any lasting meaning. The cumulative effect of the 7th plot hole is that regular show operates on what you might call consequence theater. The show performs consequences without actually implementing them. It shows you destruction and then shows you restoration. It shows you death and then shows you resurrection. It shows you endings and then shows you continuations. The performance is convincing enough that you feel the weight of consequences while watching, but the weight evaporates between episodes. This metaphor extends further than you might think. In a magic show, the audience knows the coin is not really gone. They know the rabbit was always in the hat. They know the assistant was never actually sawed in half. But they enjoy the performance because the skill of the illusion is itself a pleasure. Regular show works the same way. You know the park will be rebuilt. You know the characters will survive. You know the status quo will be restored. But you enjoy the threat because the show sells it so well. The animation conveys genuine danger. The voice acting conveys genuine fear. The music conveys genuine stakes. The 11-minute journey from crisis to resolution is exciting and satisfying, even though you know the destination before you arrive. The problem arises when the show asks you to believe that one particular magic trick is real. When Pops flies into the sun in the finale, the show is asking you to believe that this coin is actually gone, that this rabbit will not reappear, that this assistant is truly in danger. And the ask is difficult, precisely because the show has spent 7 seasons teaching you that nothing is permanent. Every previous episode was a magic trick. The finale asks you to believe that the show has stopped performing and is now telling you the truth. And for most viewers, the shift works, because the finale is so emotionally powerful that it overrides the skepticism the show has cultivated. But the skepticism was real. It was earned by 7 seasons of consequence theater. And the fact that the finale has to overcome its own show's history in order to land its emotional payload is a testament to both the depth of the plot hole and the skill of the storytelling. The relationship between regular show's episodic format and its serialized ambitions is one of the most interesting tensions in modern animated television. Most shows choose one approach or the other. Purely episodic shows like The Simpsons and SpongeBob SquarePants reset completely at the end of each episode, and their plot holes are invisible because there is no continuity to contradict. Purely serialized shows like Avatar, The Last Airbender, maintain strict continuity, and their plot holes are visible because every event is supposed to connect to every other event. Regular show occupies a middle ground that is inherently unstable. It maintains some continuity and ignores other continuity. It remembers some events and forgets others. It asks you to track some threads and release others. The instability is what makes the show dynamic, but it is also what produces the plot holes. The show's greatest strength and its greatest weakness are the same thing. The show is a magic trick where the coin is never actually gone. You feel the loss, but you never actually experience it. And the magic trick works because the show is so good at the performance that you do not notice the mechanism. The plot hole is the mechanism. The show is the trick. And the fact that you keep watching, keep caring, keep feeling the weight of consequences you know are temporary is proof that the trick is worth more than the truth. What makes the episodic reset particularly fascinating is the way it interacts with the show's emotional continuity. Regular show remembers feelings but forgets events. Mordecai's heartbreak over Margaret carries across seasons. Rigby's insecurity about his intelligence persists. Benson's loneliness deepens. These emotional threads are maintained with care and consistency, but the events that produce those emotions are selectively retained. The destruction of a building is forgotten. The death of a temporary character is erased. The interdimensional threat that nearly consumed reality is never mentioned again. The show treats its own narrative history like a journal that records how you felt, but not what happened. And the disconnect between emotional memory and factual memory is the core of this plot hole. Consider what it would look like if the show did maintain full consequence continuity. The park would be a disaster zone. Insurance premiums would be astronomical. The city would have evacuated the surrounding neighborhood years ago. Mordecai and Rigby would be in prison for property destruction on a scale that defies calculation. Benson would have been fired for gross negligence. The show would be a very different show, one about the bureaucratic aftermath of magical catastrophe, rather than one about two friends avoiding work. The episodic reset is not a failure of imagination. It is a necessary condition for the show's existence. Without it, regular show becomes a legal procedural set in a ruined park, and nobody wants to watch that. But the show could have found a middle ground. Other animated shows have demonstrated that selective consequence retention is possible without full episodic reset. Adventure Time, a show created by Pendleton Ward, who was J.G. Quintel's classmate at Cal Arts, maintains a world that changes visibly over time. Land is destroyed and stays destroyed. Characters die and stay dead. The world of Ooh bears the scars of its own history in ways that are visible to the audience and acknowledged by the characters. Regular show could have adopted a similar approach, allowing some events to leave lasting marks while resetting others. The fact that it chose not to, that it opted for near total reset in its early seasons and selective continuity in its later ones, is a creative decision that produced the plot hole. The show did not fail to maintain consequences. It chose not to maintain them, and then it changed its mind partway through its run. The transition from episodic to serialized storytelling in regular shows' later seasons is one of the most interesting structural shifts in modern animation. Seasons 1 through 4 are almost purely episodic. Season 5 begins to introduce recurring threads. Seasons 6 through 8 are increasingly serialized, culminating in the final season's space arc, which is a fully serialized narrative with clear cause and effect chains spanning multiple episodes. The plot hole exists because the early and late seasons are essentially different shows sharing the same characters. The early show promises you that nothing matters. The late show demands that everything does. And the characters exist in both shows simultaneously, carrying the emotional weight of the late seasons while standing on the weightless foundation of the early ones. The plot hole is the foundation showing through the floor. The consequence plot hole is also the plot hole most likely to be noticed by casual viewers rather than dedicated analysts. You do not need to cross-reference episode dates or compare backstory details to spot the episodic reset. You simply need to watch 2 consecutive episodes. In the first, the park is destroyed by a supernatural entity summoned by a haunted video game. In the second, the park is intact, the characters are uninjured, and no one mentions the previous episode's events. The contradiction is immediate and obvious. Most viewers process it unconsciously, accepting the reset as a convention of the genre without articulating what they have accepted. But the acceptance itself is interesting because it requires the audience to participate in the plot hole. You agree, implicitly, to forget what you saw last week, so that this week's episode can function. The show does not erase the previous episode. You do. The Plothole is a collaboration between the show and its audience. A shared agreement to prioritize the present over the past. And the agreement holds because both parties benefit from it. The show gets to tell fresh stories. You get to watch them without the burden of accumulated consequence. The 8th Plothole involves the nature of the park itself and the question of why, exactly, so many supernatural events happen there. Regular show takes place in a park that is, by any standard, the most dangerous location in the animated television universe. Portals open there. Demons emerge there. Sentient objects attack there. Cosmic entities visit there. The park is ground zero for every kind of supernatural disturbance imaginable, and yet no one in the show's world seems to find this unusual. The government does not investigate. The media does not report. The neighbors do not complain. The park continues to operate as a public space, despite being the site of what amounts to weekly apocalyptic events. The show never provides a comprehensive explanation for why the park attracts supernatural activity. Individual episodes offer specific causes for specific events. A cursed object, a magical creature, a rift in space-time. But no overarching explanation for the pattern itself is ever given. Some fans have theorized that the park sits on a supernatural nexus, or that Pops' cosmic nature draws these events to his location. The show occasionally hints at something like this without ever confirming it. The absence of an explanation is not, in itself, a plot hole. Many shows feature unexplained premises that the audience accepts as part of the fictional contract. But regular show complicates this by depicting the outside world as normal. The city surrounding the park is populated by ordinary people living ordinary lives. They go to restaurants, attend concerts, visit shopping malls, and interact with the park's employees without apparent awareness that the park is a hotspot for interdimensional chaos. The show wants you to believe that the park exists within a normal world, which means the normal world should react to the park's abnormality. The fact that it does not is a plot hole, not of plot, but of world building. The show built a world that cannot logically contain the place where the show happens. This becomes particularly acute in the episodes where the park's supernatural events spill into the surrounding community. When a monster attacks the city, or a magical object affects civilians, the outside world briefly acknowledges the park's strangeness and then forgets about it by the next episode. The collective amnesia of the show's civilian population is a running plot hole that the show never addresses, because addressing it would require the show to fundamentally change its premise. If the world remembered what happens at the park would be shut down, investigated, and quarantined. The show needs the world to forget in order to continue existing. The plot hole is the price of the show's survival, and it is a price that the show pays willingly, episode after episode, season after season. The park's supernatural nature is not a bug. It is the show's premise. Without it, regular show would be a show about two friends who work at a park and nothing unusual happens. The supernatural events are the show's reason for existing, and explaining them would diminish them. If the park sits on a mystical nexus, then every supernatural event is just a consequence of geography. If Pops' cosmic nature attracts threats, then every event is just a side effect of his existence. Any explanation reduces the magic to a mechanism, and regular show is not interested in mechanisms. It is interested in the magic itself. But the show's refusal to explain the park's supernatural magnetism creates problems that extend beyond world building. It affects the characters' psychological plausibility. After the first few supernatural events, the park staff should be traumatized. After the first few life-threatening crises, they should be seeking new employment. After the first few encounters with entities that can destroy the universe, they should be questioning the fundamental nature of their reality. But they do not. They go back to work. They rake leaves. They clean the snack bar. They behave as though weekly supernatural catastrophes are a normal part of park maintenance. The show occasionally acknowledges this through Benson's frustration, but it never fully reckons with the psychological toll of living in the regular show universe. The character's mental health is the most invisible plot hole in the show, the one that is never discussed, because discussing it would transform the show from a comedy into a psychological drama. If Mordecai and Rigby ever sat down and processed what they had been through, the processing would take longer than the show's runtime. They have fought gods. They have visited other dimensions. They have died and returned to life. They have watched friends be destroyed and rebuilt. The cumulative trauma of 8 seasons of supernatural adventure would be staggering, and the show's decision to ignore it is both a plot hole and a mercy. Some truths are too heavy for the format that contains them. The world-building plot hole also manifests in the show's geography. The park exists in what appears to be a normal American city, surrounded by houses, businesses, and other parks. But the supernatural events that originate in the park regularly spill into the surrounding area. Monsters attack the city. Magical effects alter the landscape. Portals open above residential neighborhoods. And yet the city continues to function normally. Property values do not collapse. Residents do not flee. The local government does not intervene. The city around the park exists in the same state of perpetual amnesia as the show's timeline, forgetting each catastrophe as soon as it ends. If you take the world-building plot hole to its logical extreme, the city surrounding the park is the most psychologically disturbing location in all of animation. Its residents live next to a site of repeated supernatural devastation and show no signs of awareness or concern. They go about their lives as though nothing is happening. Either they are genuinely unaware of the weekly apocalypses occurring within walking distance of their homes, which suggests some form of mass perceptual failure, or they are aware and have chosen to live with it, which suggests a level of fatalism that borders on nihilism. The show never explores either possibility, because both would transform it into a very different kind of story. There is also a philosophical dimension to the park plot hole that is worth exploring. Regular Show's park is, in many ways, a microcosm of the human experience. We all live in a world where extraordinary things happen, where the news reports events that should shatter our understanding of reality, where scientific discoveries rewrite what we thought we knew about the universe. And yet we go to work. We buy groceries. We pay our bills. We maintain our routines in the face of evidence that the world is far stranger and more dangerous than our routines acknowledge. The civilians in Regular Show City are doing exactly what real people do. They are choosing normalcy in the face of absurdity because normalcy is necessary for survival. Seen in this light, the park plot hole is not just a production convenience. It is the show's most honest depiction of how people actually deal with the incomprehensible. You do not stop going to work because the park down the street was attacked by a demon. You do not sell your house because the sky opened up over the neighborhood last week. You note the event, process it briefly, and return to your routine. The city's amnesia is not a failure of realism. It is realism at its most uncomfortable. People forget catastrophes with remarkable speed. They normalize the abnormal. They absorb the extraordinary and continue living ordinary lives. The park plot hole is the show's accidental commentary on human resilience, or perhaps human denial, in the face of events that should be world-changing, but somehow never are. The park's supernatural magnetism also creates an interesting hierarchy of knowledge within the show. The park staff knows the park is dangerous. They have direct, repeated experience of supernatural threats, but they keep working there, which suggests either that they have no better options or that they have accepted the danger as part of the job. The civilians do not know the park is dangerous, or at least do not act as though they know. This creates a two-tier system where the park staff lives with knowledge that the rest of the world does not share. They are the initiated, the people who have seen behind the curtain, and they cannot communicate what they have seen because no one would believe them. The park staff's isolation is a plot hole, but it is also a metaphor for the experience of anyone who has knowledge that the world around them does not share or does not want. The city's normalcy is a plot hole that the show needs to maintain, because the alternative, a city that realistically responds to the park's chaos, would end the show. But the show does hint, in rare moments, that the outside world is not entirely oblivious. In the Season 3 episode Under the Hood, which aired on February 6th, 2012, the park receives media attention that suggests the broader community is at least occasionally aware of the strange events occurring within its boundaries. In Skips in the Saddle, Season 4, Episode 14, The park's reputation is referenced in a way that implies some level of public notoriety. These moments are never developed into a consistent subplot. They appear, offer a brief acknowledgement that the world outside the park might be paying attention, and then vanish. The show touches the possibility of external awareness and then withdraws, because fully committing to that possibility would require the show to build a world beyond the park that reacts to the park's events. And that world would be expensive, complicated, and potentially incompatible with the show's 11-minute format. The supernatural magnetism plot hole is also the plot hole most resistant to the show's own attempts at explanation. Other plot holes on this list can be rationalized with varying degrees of effort. The moon's survival can be attributed to cartoon logic. The Skip's technology contradiction can be explained by selective memory. The frozen timeline is a genre convention, but the park's ability to attract interdimensional threats every single week requires either a causal explanation that the show does not provide until its final season, or an acceptance that the show's world simply operates by different rules than ours. The Pop's revelation in Season 8 provides a retroactive explanation. The park attracts supernatural events because it contains a being of cosmic significance, and cosmic significance draws cosmic attention. But this explanation, like many of the show's retroactive revelations, raises more questions than it answers. If Pops' presence explains the supernatural magnetism, then the magnetism should have existed before the park did, following Pops wherever he went. The show does not explore this implication. The explanation is satisfying in the moment of its delivery, and less satisfying the longer you think about it, which is by now a pattern you should be very familiar with. The 9th plot hole involves Benson's management of the park and the question of why Mordecai and Rigby still have jobs. This is the most commonly cited plot hole in the show's history, and it is worth examining in detail because it reveals something fundamental about the show's structure. Mordecai and Rigby are, by any objective measure, terrible employees. They shirk their duties, they damage property, they endanger their coworkers. They cause incidents that result in supernatural catastrophes requiring intervention from entities ranging from death to the guardians of eternal youth. In any real workplace, they would have been fired after the first week. In the show's world, they are employed for 8 seasons. Benson threatens to fire them constantly. His catchphrase, effectively, is, "You are fired," but he never follows through, or when he does, the firing is immediately reversed. The show needs Mordecai and Rigby to work at the park, because the park is where the show takes place. If they are fired, they leave, and if they leave, the show ends. The plot hole is structural. The show cannot allow its premise to collapse, and so it maintains an employment relationship that its own internal logic says should have ended years ago. The defense of this plot hole is that Benson genuinely cares about Mordecai and Rigby, despite his frustration with them. Several episodes support this reading. Benson has moments of vulnerability, where he admits that the park staff is the closest thing he has to a family. He attends their milestones. He defends them against external threats. The show suggests that Benson keeps them employed not because they deserve it, but because losing them would mean losing a connection he cannot replace. This is emotionally compelling, and it almost resolves the plot hole. Almost. Because the show also depicts Benson as a responsible manager who takes his job seriously and who answers to Mr. Maillard, who would presumably not tolerate the retention of employees who regularly destroy his property. The emotional explanation for Benson's tolerance contradicts the professional explanation for why he should not be tolerant. The plot hole is the space between Benson's heart and Benson's job. There is also the question of accountability. When Mordecai and Rigby's actions cause massive damage to the park, someone should be paying for it. Insurance claims should be filed. Budgets should be strained. Mr. Maillard should be furious. And occasionally, he is. But the financial consequences of the park's repeated destruction are never seriously explored. The park has unlimited resources for rebuilding, unlimited tolerance for employee incompetence, and an unlimited ability to absorb costs that would bankrupt any real institution. The economic plot hole is the foundation beneath the employment plot hole, and both are the foundation beneath the show itself. Regular show's premise requires a park that cannot fail and employees who cannot be fired. and both of those requirements contradict the realistic consequences that the show intermittently tries to depict. The Benson employment plot hole also intersects with the show's depiction of workplace dynamics in ways that are more interesting than they might initially appear. Regular Show is, at its core, a workplace comedy. It is about the experience of having a job you do not love, working for a boss who does not appreciate you, and finding meaning in the relationships you build with your coworkers, rather than in the work itself. This premise requires a realistic enough workplace that the audience can recognize their own experiences in it. But it also requires that the workplace survive conditions that would destroy any real institution. The tension between realism and survival produces some of the show's funniest moments. Benson's rage, his sputtering, red-faced fury at Mordecai, and Rigby's latest disaster is funny precisely because it is realistic. Any manager in Benson's position would react the same way. The comedy comes from the mismatch between the realistic emotion and the unrealistic context. Benson is genuinely angry about a situation that is genuinely absurd. He is trying to manage a park where the laws of physics are optional, and he is responding with the tools of conventional management, threats, schedules, performance reviews, as though those tools have any power in a world where a keyboard can send people to the moon. But the comedy depends on the plot hole never being resolved. If Benson actually fired Mordecai and Rigby, the comedy would end. If the park actually faced financial consequences for its destruction, the comedy would end. If Mr. Maillard actually held Benson accountable for the state of the park, the comedy would end. The plot hole is not a flaw in the comedy. It is the mechanism that makes the comedy possible. Benson's impotent rage is funny because it never results in real consequences. The moment it does, the show transforms from a comedy about workplace frustration into a drama about unemployment. The plot hole keeps the show in the genre it wants to inhabit. But the Benson employment plot hole has another dimension that is worth exploring, and it involves Mr. Maillard's role as the park's owner. Mr. Maillard is depicted as a demanding, sometimes cruel boss who holds Benson to high standards and is quick to threaten his job. If Benson is afraid of losing his own job, his tolerance of Mordecai and Rigby's behavior becomes even more puzzling. Every time they destroy something, Benson's position is at risk. Every time they cause a supernatural incident, Benson has to explain it to an owner who is already skeptical of his competence. Benson's decision to keep Mordecai and Rigby employed is not just a personal choice. It is a professional risk that could cost him his own livelihood. The show depicts Benson as a man who is constantly stressed about his job security, and yet he repeatedly makes decisions that jeopardize that security by retaining employees who actively endanger the park. The explanation that Benson cares about Mordecai and Rigby as people, not just as employees, is emotionally compelling but professionally irrational. A manager who values personal relationships over institutional responsibilities is a manager who will eventually be fired. Benson should have been fired for retaining Mordecai and Rigby long before Mordecai and Rigby were fired for their behavior. The fact that both Benson and his employees survived the show's entire run without facing real professional consequences is a plot hole that undermines the show's depiction of workplace dynamics, even as it supports the show's depiction of family dynamics. The park staff is a family. Families do not fire each other, but the park is also a business. Businesses fire people all the time. The show chose to treat the park as a family and as a business simultaneously, and the employment plot hole is the result. There is also the economic dimension of the plot hole. The park is a public space that appears to generate minimal revenue. It has a snack bar, but the snack bar's income cannot possibly cover the cost of the repeated catastrophic damage the park sustains. Insurance premiums alone would be astronomical, assuming any insurance company would cover a property that is destroyed by supernatural forces on a near weekly basis. The show never addresses the park's financial viability because doing so would raise uncomfortable questions about the entire premise. If the park cannot sustain itself economically, it should close. If it closes, the characters lose their jobs, and the show loses its setting. The economic plot hole is the most pragmatic plot hole on this list. the one most clearly connected to the mechanical requirements of keeping the show running. Mr. Maillard's wealth provides a partial answer. He is depicted as a wealthy man who owns the park as a hobby, or as a legacy, rather than as a profit-making enterprise. If the park is funded by Maillard's personal fortune, the financial plot hole is reduced, because the park does not need to be profitable to survive. But this explanation raises its own questions. If Maillard is funding the park out of pocket, he is paying for the receipted destruction of his own property, caused by employees he could easily replace. Even for a wealthy man, this seems like a poor use of resources. The show suggests that Maillard's attachment to the park is emotional rather than financial, rooted in his relationship with Pops and his desire to give Pops a place to live and work. This explanation connects the employment plot hole to the Pops plot hole, creating a chain of interconnected contradictions that runs through the entire series. Maillard keeps the park open for Pops. Benson keeps his job because the park is open. Mordecai and Rigby keep their jobs because Benson keeps his. The entire employment structure of the show depends on one man's emotional attachment to his adopted alien son. And if that attachment ever wavered, the entire structure would collapse. There is also the question of what Mordecai and Rigby actually contribute to the park. The show frequently depicts them avoiding work, but it also occasionally shows them completing tasks successfully. They mow lawns, they set up events, they perform maintenance, and they do so with a competence that contradicts their reputation as slackers. The plot hole here is not that they are bad employees. It is that the show cannot decide how bad they are. In some episodes, they are so incompetent that their continued employment defies all logic. In other episodes, they are capable workers who simply need motivation. The inconsistency serves the show's needs, giving the writers flexibility to depict Mordecai and Rigby as either competent or incompetent depending on what the episode requires. But it means that the audience's understanding of the characters as employees is never stable. Are they genuinely bad at their jobs? Or are they good at their jobs, but unwilling to try? The show says both, and the plot hole is in the contradiction. The most generous reading of the Benson plot hole is that it is the show's commentary on the nature of work itself. Real workplaces are not always logical. Real managers do not always fire employees who deserve to be fired. Real institutions tolerate dysfunction for reasons that are emotional, political, and personal, rather than rational. Benson keeps Mordecai and Rigby employed for the same reasons that real bosses keep underperforming employees. He is used to them. He needs them. He has invested too much in the relationship to start over with someone new. The plot hole in this reading is not a flaw in the show's logic. It is the show's most realistic observation about how workplaces actually function. But there is a darker reading of the Benson plot hole, and it involves the economics of the park itself. Mr. Maillard owns the park. Benson manages it. The park employs a groundskeeper, a maintenance worker, a snack bar operator, and 2 general-purpose employees. For a public park, this is a small staff. The budget, by any reasonable estimation, is modest, and yet the park sustains catastrophic property damage on a regular basis. Damage that should generate repair costs far exceeding what a small municipal park could afford. Buildings are destroyed and rebuilt. Equipment is vaporized and replaced. The cart, which is wrecked in dozens of episodes, is always operational by the next one. Someone is paying for this. The show never explains who or how, and the economic impossibility of the park's continued operation is itself a plot hole nested inside the Benson plot hole. If the park cannot afford to repair the damage that Mordecai and Rigby cause, it certainly cannot afford to continue employing them. And if it can afford to repair the damage, then the park has a source of funding that the show never identifies, which raises questions about Maillard's financial empire that the show is not interested in answering. The Benson employment plot hole also intersects with the show's treatment of labor and class in ways that are rarely discussed. Benson is a middle manager. He has authority over the park staff, but no authority over the conditions that make his job impossible. He cannot fire the employees who destroy his workplace because the owner, Maillard, does not support him. He cannot improve the park's infrastructure because the budget, whatever it is, does not allow for it. He cannot protect his staff from supernatural threats because those threats are beyond his expertise and his pay grade. Benson is trapped in a management position that gives him responsibility without power, accountability without resources. His anger, which the show plays for comedy, is the rational response of a person who has been placed in an impossible situation and told to make it work. The plot hole is that no reasonable person would stay in Benson's position. The answer the show implies, but never states, is that Benson has nowhere else to go. His drumming career failed. His relationships have ended. The park is all he has. And so he stays, managing chaos that he cannot control and employees that he cannot discipline, because the alternative is admitting that this is all there is. The plot hole, viewed this way, is not about Benson's management decisions. It is about Benson's entire life, and it is the saddest plot hole on this list. The 10th and final plot hole is the largest and the most difficult to articulate, because it is not a single contradiction, but a pattern that runs through the entire series. It is the question of what regular show's universe actually is. The show presents itself as taking place in a version of our world where anthropomorphic animals, sentient objects, and supernatural phenomena coexist with ordinary human beings. Mordecai is a blue jay. Rigby is a raccoon. Benson is a gumball machine. Pops is a lollipop-headed man. Skips is a yeti. These characters live alongside humans, who appear to find nothing unusual about their existence. The show never explains why some characters are animals, some are objects, and some are humans. It never establishes the rules of its own biology, its own physics, or its own sociology. The show's world is a collage of incompatible elements, held together by the audience's willingness not to ask questions. This willingness works for most of the show's run. You accept that Mordecai is a blue jay because the show tells you he is, and because the alternative is to question the entire premise. But the willingness breaks down at specific points where the show draws attention to the inconsistency. When Mordecai, a bird, dates Margaret, another bird, the show treats this as a normal romantic relationship. When Mordecai later dates CJ, a cloud person, the show also treats this as normal. But what are the biological implications of a bird dating a cloud? What does it mean for a gumball machine to have emotions? How does a raccoon who is 4 feet tall interact with a physical world built for human-sized beings? The show occasionally acknowledges these questions, usually for comedy, and then immediately moves on. The plot hole is not that the show fails to answer these questions. It is that the show selectively engages with the implications of its own premise when it serves the story and ignores those implications when they would complicate the story. Mordecai's species matters when the show wants to make a joke about birds. It does not matter when the show wants to tell a serious story about heartbreak. Benson's nature as a gumball machine matters when the show wants visual comedy. It does not matter when the show wants to explore his loneliness. The characters exist in a state of ontological ambiguity, simultaneously defined by their non-human nature and unburdened by its implications. Consider the specific case of Mordecai's romantic relationships. When Mordecai dates Margaret, the show treats this as a normal boy-meets-girl romance. The fact that they are both birds is irrelevant to the emotional dynamics of their relationship. They flirt, they hesitate, they kiss, they argue, they break up. None of these events are depicted differently because the characters are avian. But the show occasionally acknowledges Mordecai's bird nature for comedic effect, usually in the form of visual gags or one-line jokes. He flies. He has feathers. He has a beak. These physical traits are present when the show remembers them and absent when the show forgets them. Mordecai is a bird when it is funny and a human when it is dramatic. The plot hole is not about what Mordecai is. It is about what the show needs him to be at any given moment. This ontological flexibility extends to every character in the show. Benson is a gumball machine who experiences human emotions, maintains human relationships, and suffers human frustrations. The show never explains how a gumball machine can feel loneliness, desire romantic connection, or experience professional dissatisfaction. It simply asserts that Benson does these things and asks the audience to accept it. And the audience does, because the emotional truth of Benson's experience is more compelling than the logical question of how a vending machine developed an inner life. The plot hole is real, but the emotional payoff of ignoring it is greater than the intellectual satisfaction of resolving it. Muscle Man is another case study in ontological ambiguity. He is described as a human, but his skin is green. His body defies normal human proportions, and his behavior includes physical feats that no human could perform. Is he a human with an unusual skin condition? Is he a supernatural being who resembles a human? Is he something else entirely? The show never says, and the ambiguity is part of his comedy. Muscle Man is funny, partly because you do not know what he is. If the show explained his nature, it would reduce him to a category, and categories are less funny than mysteries. The ontological plot hole is the plot hole that makes regular show possible. If the show established clear rules for what its characters are and how their natures affect their behavior, it would lose the flexibility that allows it to tell any story it wants. A show where birds can only do bird things and gumball machines can only do gumball machine things is a show with severe narrative limitations. By leaving the ontology undefined, the show can tell stories about friendship, love, loss, ambition, failure, and redemption without being constrained by the biological or mechanical realities of its characters' forms. The plot hole is the price of narrative freedom, and regular show chose freedom over consistency because freedom produces better stories. This is ultimately the lesson of all 10 plot holes. Every contradiction in regular show exists because the show chose emotion over logic, flexibility over consistency, and the immediate experience of the viewer over the long-term coherence of the world. These are not accidents. They are priorities. And the fact that the show remains beloved, discussed, and rewatched despite its contradictions, or perhaps because of them, suggests that the priorities were correct. Logic creates worlds that make sense. Emotion creates worlds that matter. Regular show chose to matter, and the plot holes are the evidence of that choice. This is the plot hole that contains all the other plot holes. The moon survival, the Skip's technology contradiction, the age inconsistency, the Pop's timeline, the Thomas spy reveal, the episodic reset, the park's supernatural magnetism, the employment mystery, and the Rigby education contradiction all stem from the same root cause. Regular show built a world without rules, and then tried to tell stories that require rules. It created characters without consistent natures, and then asked those characters to carry emotional arcs that depend on consistency. It wanted the freedom of a cartoon and the depth of a drama, and the plot holes are the places where those two ambitions could not coexist. But here's the thing about these plot holes that makes them different from the plot holes in most other shows. They do not ruin regular show. They are part of it. The show's willingness to contradict itself, to prioritize the immediate emotional truth of a single episode over the long-term logical consistency of the series, is not a failure. It is a philosophy. Regular show believes that how a moment feels matters more than whether that moment fits neatly into a larger framework. It believes that a funny joke is worth a continuity error. It believes that a moving scene is worth a timeline contradiction. It believes that the emotional experience of watching the show, right now, in this moment, is more important than the intellectual exercise of mapping the show's world onto a coherent set of rules. And this philosophy produces something that most logically consistent shows cannot produce. It produces surprise. Because the rules of regular show's world are not fixed. Anything can happen at any time. A trip to the coffee shop can become a battle with a demonic barista. A night of video games can become a walk through a cursed dimension. A conversation about feelings can become a confrontation with a cosmic entity. The plot holes are the cracks in the wall through which the unexpected enters. If the show had sealed those cracks, if it had maintained perfect consistency, it would also have maintained perfect predictability. The plot holes are the price of a show that can surprise you, and regular show chose surprise over consistency every single time. Which brings you back to where you started. December in one episode, July in the next. 6 months of time, vanished without explanation. The characters do not notice because the show does not need them to notice. The audience does not notice or does not care because the show has earned enough trust to spend it on logical shortcuts. The plot hole is there, visible and undeniable, and it does not matter. Not because it is not real, but because the show was always more interested in what it could make you feel than in what it could make you believe. Regular show's plot holes are not mistakes. They are the fingerprints of a show that was being made by human beings, in real time, under pressure, with passion, and without a safety net. The inconsistencies are the evidence that the show was alive, and alive is the right word. A show that is perfectly consistent is a show that has been planned to the last detail, where every episode was written with full knowledge of every other episode, where every character's history was mapped out before the first frame was drawn. That show exists somewhere, but it is not regular show. Regular show was made the way life is lived, one day at a time, one decision at a time, with each new episode responding to the needs of the moment, rather than the demands of a master plan. The plot holes are the evidence of this process. They are the places where the show changed its mind, where a new idea replaced an old one, where a better story was chosen over a consistent one. And there is something deeply appropriate about a show called Regular Show having irregular logic. The title has always been ironic. The show is not regular. It is extraordinary. It is a show where a trip to the store becomes a battle with a supernatural entity, where a game of rock, paper, scissors determines the fate of the universe, where two friends who work at a park somehow end up in space, fighting for the survival of all existence. Nothing about this show is regular except its characters' desire for regularity. Mordecai and Rigby just want a normal day. They never get one. And the plot holes are the show's way of telling you that normality is impossible in a world this strange. Even the normality of consistent storytelling. Consider what it would mean for Regular Show to have no plot holes. It would mean that the first episode and the last episode operate under the same rules. It would mean that Skips' knowledge is consistent. It would mean that the characters age. It would mean that the park's destruction has financial consequences. It would mean that Benson fires Mordecai and Rigby. It would mean that the world around the park reacts to the supernatural chaos. It would mean that every character has a single, coherent backstory that never changes. In other words, it would mean a completely different show. A show with no plot holes would not be Regular Show improved. It would be Regular Show destroyed. The plot holes are not separate from the show's identity. They are part of its identity. They are the spaces where the show chose feeling over thinking, impulse over planning, and joy over correctness. There is a temptation, when analyzing a show you love, to wish its flaws away, to imagine a version that is perfect, that has no contradictions, that answers every question and resolves every inconsistency. But that version would not be the show you love. It would be a different show, a smoother and more logical and infinitely less interesting show. The plot holes are where Regular Show's rough edges are, and the rough edges are where its personality lives. A perfectly sanded surface is nice to touch, but tells you nothing about the wood. The plot holes are the grain of the wood. They are the marks left by the tools that shaped it. They are the evidence that someone made this thing by hand, with care and imprecision and love. And perhaps that is the real answer to the question the 10th plot hole asks. What is Regular Show? It is a show that does not know what it is, and that refusal to know is its greatest creative asset. A show that knew exactly what it was would be constrained by that knowledge. It would have to follow the rules it set for itself, maintain the boundaries it established, and produce content that fits within its self-defined category. Regular Show never defined itself, and so it was never constrained. It could be a workplace comedy one week and a cosmic epic the next. It could kill a character in one episode and resurrect them in another. It could treat physics as optional in September and mandatory in March. It could be anything it wanted to be in any given 11 minutes. And the plot holes are the price it paid for that freedom. The price is worth it. Freedom always costs more than consistency, and the return on investment is always higher. The ontological ambiguity is not the 10th plot hole because it is the worst. It is the 10th plot hole because it contains all the others. Every contradiction on this list, from the moon to Benson's management to Thomas's espionage, exists because the show refused to commit to a single version of reality. The moon survival exists because the show had not yet decided whether its characters could die. The Skips contradiction exists because the show had not yet decided whether its characters' skills were permanent. The Rigby retcon exists because the show had not yet decided whether its backstories were fixed. Each plot hole is a symptom of ontological ambiguity, a moment where the show's undefined nature produced a specific, identifiable contradiction. The 10th plot hole is not one contradiction. It is the condition that produces all contradictions. It is the meta plot hole, the plot hole that explains plot holes. And it is the reason regular show is the kind of show that inspires 2-hour essays about its imperfections, rather than 2-hour essays about its flawless execution. The 10 plot holes on this list are the 10 largest contradictions in a show that ran for 261 episodes across 8 seasons and a movie. 10 contradictions in 262 pieces of storytelling is a remarkably small number. It means that the show got it right more than 96% of the time. The 4% that it got wrong, the moon survival, and the Skips technology, and the Frozen Age, and the Rigby backstory, and the Pops timeline, and the Thomas reveal, and the episodic reset, and the Park magnetism, and the Benson employment, and the ontological ambiguity. That 4% is what makes the other 96% human. The plot holes are not the disease. They are the immune response. They are the show's body reacting to the impossible demands of making 262 stories in the same universe, while keeping every one of them surprising and every one of them true to the feelings of the people who made them. What these 10 plot holes reveal, taken together, is not that regular show was careless. It is that regular show was brave. Every plot hole on this list is the result of a creative choice that prioritized ambition over safety, that chose to reach for something powerful, even when reaching meant letting go of something consistent. The moon survival happened because the show wanted a spectacular first episode more than it wanted airtight physics. The Skips contradiction happened because the show wanted a great comedy episode more than it wanted a perfectly documented character. The Rigby retcon happened because the show wanted a movie-worthy emotional reveal more than it wanted to honor a throwaway detail from 4 years earlier. In every case, the show chose the version that felt more alive. And in every case, the choice left a mark. The marks are the plot holes. And the marks, like all scars, are proof that the thing that bears them survived something. You started this essay with a Christmas special and a fireworks episode, 2 moments separated by 6 months and 2 episodes, with nothing in between to explain the gap. You end it with the understanding that the gap is the show. Regular show lives in the spaces between its own contradictions, in the moments where logic breaks and emotion takes over, in the places where the rules fail and the story survives anyway. The plot holes are not holes in the story. They are windows into the way the story was made, the way it was felt, and the way it was loved. And the fact that you are still thinking about them, years after the show ended, is proof that a plot hole in a show you care about is more interesting than perfect logic in a show you forgot. If you found something worth carrying away from this, subscribing helps more than you would think. Thank you for staying. I will see you in the next one.